Boycotting and war as regulation against abuse on a free market. A boycott. Boycott is a movement and or agreement among individuals and or institutions to not purchase or sell to an individual or institution. An example would be boycotting animal furs and clothing or chlorofluorocarbons in aerosol sprays. Abuse is an activity which incites a boycott. War is the use of force in an attempt to stop perceived abuse. This definition may seem incomplete as it wouldn't encompass bald and overt aggression, but bald and overt aggression is simply reaction to perceived abuse, that is, another person using resources that the aggressor wants. If one person finds your existence to be abusive, then war will be a reaction to perceived abuse. And your defense against them will be a reaction to your perceived abuse. I'm not making any value judgments here, I'm just defining what's going on. First, let us look at a firm. On a free market, accounting profit and economic profit, right? Economic profit is basically accounting profit minus opportunity cost. On a free market, accounting profit and economic profit tend toward zero. If a firm engages in any kind of abusive behavior, such as paying workers below a living wage, causing environmental damage, physical assault against individuals, they will be boycotted by someone. Let us take a theoretical construction of a world with zero accounting profit, and where there had been no prior net accounting profit for any firm, that is, there are no war chests. Everything runs exactly at cost worldwide, and there's no money in the back room. If a firm were to be boycotted in this market, that would shift the demand curve to the left, and there are now ever so slightly less people willing to buy their service. This firm would then have to shut off existing lines of production and reduce costs precisely to the amount that revenues are lower because of the boycott, and the firm must do this instantaneously. Assuming the firm could calculate instantaneously, the firm would have to be perfectly divisible precisely by the percentage of demand lost as a result of the boycott, or else divide even further than the lost revenue from the boycott. For example, if a boycott of the products from firm A results in a 1% reduction in demand on a zero-profit market, firm A would have to reduce their production costs by at least 1% to stay afloat. If their lines of production were not divisible by 1%, then they would have to reduce their lines of production by more than 1% until they can approach a size that does not run at a loss. Let's say firm A has 3 stages of production, inputs 1, 2, and 3. And let's explicitly define the inputs as labor, the building, and widget material. Let's say it takes 1 building, 10 laborers, and 100 widget materials to produce 300 widgets per day. And this results in zero profit, just enough to pay for everything, including labor, and make it to the next day. If the firm has 5 buildings, pays 50 laborers, and buys 500 widget materials per day, it is not divisible by 1%. It is divisible by 1/5, or 20%, because it has 5 buildings. And that's, It is divisible by 20%, assuming the buildings are not divisible. If the buildings are divisible, then it can be divided by that. If you can divide each of the 5 buildings in half, then it could be divisible by 10%. Anyway, but let's say the buildings are not divisible. If this is the case, then a 1% boycott on this firm in a zero-profit market will result in that firm contracting by 20%. It will shut down 1 building, lay off 10 laborers, and stop buying 100 widget materials per day. Now, in reality, markets are not so high-strung to where a 1% boycott instantaneously results in a 20% contraction of a firm. But this model does show that unless a firm is a homogeneous aggregate, boycotts can force a contraction of a firm greater than the amount of revenue lost. Ironically, this will result in the now smaller firm immediately becoming profitable because there's now some unmet demand, right? Because output shrunk by 20% in response to a 1% boycott. However, this profit will be shared by the boycotted firm's competitors who also produce widgets, and they will be able to expand production because they now have some extra money from their profits to do so. This will lead to the gap caused by the 20% contraction of the boycotted firm being filled by whatever firms can do so, which will probably also include the boycotted firm. And the boycotted firm will grow to fill the gap caused by the boycott of itself. Kind of ironic. On a free market, however, there is never zero accounting profit. Firms have both accounting profit and war chests. On the matter of accounting profit, let's say firm A before the boycott earns 3% profit per year. If firm A were boycotted by 1%, firm A would be able to stay afloat without any changes to their production lines. Right? They would now be earning 2% profit per year, assuming all else was equal. If they were boycotted at, say, 6%, and firm A did not change their production lines at all, the firm would run losses. Firm A could, if they predicted the boycott of 1 or 6%, if they predicted the boycott of 1% or 6% would eventually end, make certain parts of their structure of production dormant. Right? That is, they could pay 4 people instead of 10 for a given building to produce widgets, and only buy 40 widget materials. But they would be leery to just lay off the 6 employees who were well integrated and proven in their line of widget production, and so could pay these people half of their pre-boycott salary for doing nothing. Right? They could keep them on retainer. Since demand is now 6% lower as a result of the boycott, the widgets they would have produced would now sell at the pre-boycott price, assuming discrete price intervals for the sake of modeling, and so it makes sense for the firm to not employ them, but at the same time their experience in the production of widgets is an asset, and so the firm paying them half on the condition that they would return to firm A's widget production lines is the most prudent move. These 6 workers could then work at a temporary job in which they are not experienced and earn the remainder of their pre-boycott income by working at McDonald's, for example. And once the boycott ended, they would return to their original work at original pay, at full pay. The firm could run losses from a boycott as long as they had a war chest, funds saved up to ride out boycotts and strikes, but more on that later. Or they could sell promissory bonds. And all this is a populist and elegant solution. Firm A achieved profits prior to the boycott by providing value to society at 3% per year. That is, the resources they provided to society were 3% more valuable than the resources seized from society, value being determined by the subjective valuations of society itself. If the boycott then causes them to run a loss of 3% per year, that means the firm is causing as much harm to society, as determined by the aggregate subjective valuations of society, which manifest in a boycott, as they were providing value beforehand. If they continue to abuse on a free market, they will eventually go bankrupt or be forced to contract. What is in my estimation more beautiful about this is that the boycott for abuse has the same impact as a firm wasting resources. If a firm, not through boycott but through imprudence, starts running losses, that means the cost of the inputs exceeds the price paid by society for those for the outputs. Right? Let me just say that again. If a firm, not through boycott but through imprudence, starts running losses, that means the cost of the inputs exceeds the price paid by society for the outputs, and the price of both is determined by society. And so this waste would be abuse if not for the regulation for the firm losing money, right? This loss amounts to a transfer of resources to society to the extent that the firm wasted society's resources, the loss. A state program is a firm that not only wastes resources without suffering the same losses, but necessarily does so. That's the whole point of it being a state program. Statism is antisocial. In the case where abuse is felt profoundly by a few who are not capable of engineering an effective boycott, there can be free market war, often labeled terrorism or guerrilla war. The boycott itself works under the assumption that not many will participate, but that profit margins on a free market are so small that only a small percentage can force significant concessions from a firm. That is, you only need a few people to force significant concessions from a firm. Right? The firm may be huge and have a whole lot of revenue, but not a large profit margin. And so all a boycott has to do is cut at the profit margin, not at the total revenue. Because valuations are different for different people, not all will participate in boycotting a firm, and if the perceived abuse committed by a firm is extreme enough for some individuals, they will be willing to go to war with the firm, with the conditions for peace being whatever the parties involved decide. Now, unlike a war between states, however, the war is between armies of mercenaries and fanatics, and the whole of society is not called upon by some presupposed state to wage a war against the people/land of another contiguous area. Thus, society will not view the deaths of non-combatants as collateral damage, but as murder, unless they view the combating armies with the same reverence as society currently views the state, and since this is a free market, I'm assuming this is not the case. Thus, free market wars will be more likely to be wars of annihilation, though limited in scope to the parties choosing to be involved. It will be war concentrate. And when we scale down the analysis of boycott and war to the individual, we find the same thing happening, only it is called interpersonal relations and law, respectively. If a person is found to be causing abuse, the firm may fire him, cut his pay, friends will stop being friends, etc. All various ways to make a person pay for causing some sort of abuse on the interpersonal level. This is the boycott. Works exactly like it's all economics. If a person causes significant abuse, like for example raping someone, boycotting of the individual will not be sufficient. Unlike a firm, a 6% reduction of the rapist's pay doesn't cause the rapist to, quote, go out of business, close quote. And this is why wars against individuals are more common than wars against institutions. So let's assume a 99.5% boycott for the rapist. There are still a few businesses that will hire him, right, and buy his labor, and a few firms that will buy the goods produced by those businesses. If it is a niche market, and to be sure, it will deprive the rapist of the full benefits of the global division of labor and structure of production, but it will prevent the rapist from having to pay his full debt to society. A firm, by polluting the ozone layer, for example, will incur a debt to society as manifest in a boycott and or war. If the firm is providing enough value to society, they will earn profits that will allow them to override the boycott and or hire a mercenary army capable to win the war. Similarly, a rapist, by committing rape, has also incurred a debt to society. If he provides enough value to society in other ways, he can pay off the rape victim and her family friend circle, or hire a mercenary, a bodyguard, to win the war against the violent attacks of the rape victim's family and friends. And I predict this is unlikely to work even for billionaires. Abuse to society manifests in society responding with a boycott. If the boycott does not satisfy someone's call for retribution, the result is war. If a rape causes the boycott response from society to go over 100%, the result is necessarily a war of annihilation, or at the interpersonal level, the death penalty. Though in all likelihood, a boycott response of 50% from a rape would probably result in the rapist being killed by someone, because if the boycott response is 50% society-wide, then that's a good sign that somebody goes over 100% and they want complete retribution, killing you. Finally, controversial individuals can simultaneously produce a high boycott response and garner a high ideological following, and thus acquire a voluntary bodyguard that can offset the attacks of fanatics. This bodyguard can be explicit, an explicitly hired bodyguard, or just a sea of fans. Also, people can support free speech to the point of opposing a boycott against certain individuals, even if they don't like what those individuals are saying. This could be taken to the point of joining a defensive war on the side of the blackballed individual they do not like, just for the sake of free speech.